The sound of thunder woke Austin Sawyer from his restless sleep, and he sat up in the darkness of his cabin, listening to the rain hammer against the wooden roof like 1,000 desperate fists. It was late September in 1878, and the storm that had rolled through the Sierra Nevada foothills into Downieville, California, had been building for 3 days, turning the dusty mining town into a muddy maze of flooded streets and worried faces. Austin pulled on his boots and grabbed his oilcloth coat, knowing that weather like this often meant trouble for travelers caught unprepared in the wilderness. And as a man who had spent the better part of his 26 years learning these mountains, he felt a gnawing responsibility to check the trails near his property before dawn broke. The rain soaked through his hat within minutes of stepping outside, cold droplets running down his neck as he saddled his mare and guided her carefully along the swollen creek that bordered his land. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the twisted pines and the rocky outcroppings that made this stretch of California both beautiful and treacherous, and Austin squinted through the downpour, searching for any sign of stranded miners or foolish travelers who might have tried to beat the storm. He was about to turn back when his horse whinnied nervously, her ears flicking toward a massive fallen oak that had been hollowed out by fire years ago, creating a natural shelter that animals sometimes used during harsh weather. Something about the way his mare refused to move forward made Austin dismount and approach on foot, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip, though he loosened his grip when he heard no sound of danger. He crouched down and peered into the dark hollow of the tree, and his breath caught in his chest when lightning flashed again, revealing a young woman curled on her side, her clothes torn and muddy, her dark hair plastered against her pale face, unconscious or asleep in a way that spoke of complete exhaustion. Austin's heart hammered as he reached in to touch her shoulder, relieved when he felt the warmth of her skin and saw the shallow rise and fall of her breathing, though her lips had taken on a bluish tint that told him she had been exposed to the elements far too long. He did not hesitate, gathering her into his arms with as much gentleness as his work-roughened hands could manage, shocked by how light she felt, as though she had not eaten properly in days. She stirred slightly against his chest, a small sound escaping her lips, but she did not wake, and Austin wrapped his coat around her before mounting his horse with difficulty, cradling her against him as he urged the mare toward home. The ride back felt endless, each jostle making him wince with worry that he might be causing her pain, but he pushed through the rain and darkness, his cabin finally appearing like a beacon through the trees, smoke still rising from the chimney where he had banked the fire before leaving. Inside, Austin kicked the door shut against the wind and carried the woman straight to his bed, the only real bed in the single-room cabin, with its thick quilts and feather mattress that his mother had insisted he take when he left home to try his fortune in the gold fields 5 years ago. He laid her down carefully, then stood back, suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation, but knowing that propriety mattered far less than survival in moments like these. Her clothes were soaked through, and he could see her shivering even in her unconscious state, so he grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them over her, then stoked the fire until the cabin glowed with warmth, all while stealing glances at her face, wondering who she was and what had brought her to such desperate circumstances. As the hours passed and dawn began to lighten the storm-dark sky, Austin sat in his chair near the fire, watching her sleep, noting the delicate features that even exhaustion and dirt could not hide. She looked young, perhaps 20 or 21, with long lashes that cast shadows on her cheeks and lips that, as they regained their natural color in the warmth, proved to be a soft rose. He found himself wondering about her story, imagining a dozen different scenarios that might have left her alone and vulnerable in the wilderness, though none of them sat quite right in his mind, and he resolved to wait patiently for her to wake and tell him herself, rather than spinning tales that might be far from the truth. It was well past noon when she finally stirred, her eyelids fluttering before opening to reveal eyes the color of spring leaves, bright and startling in their intensity. Austin stood from his chair, moving slowly so as not to frighten her, but he saw the moment panic set in, her body going rigid under the blankets, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar cabin before landing on him with unmistakable fear. "Easy now," he said softly, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace. "You are safe here. I found you in a hollowed tree during the storm last night, and I brought you back to my cabin so you could rest properly. My name is Austin Sawyer, and I mean you no harm." She stared at him for a long moment, her breathing rapid, and he could see her mind working, trying to assess whether he was telling the truth or whether she had traded one danger for another. Finally, she spoke, her voice hoarse and cracked from disuse. "Where am I?" "About 3 miles outside Downieville," Austin replied, taking a cautious step closer. "You are in my home. Can you tell me your name? What happened to you?" Her eyes filled with tears that she blinked back furiously, as though crying would be a weakness she could not afford. "Luna," she whispered. "My name is Luna Nichols, and I was traveling with a wagon train heading to Sacramento when we were attacked 2 days ago. Bandits. They killed the drivers and took everything of value. I managed to hide in the brush, but when I tried to find my way to the nearest town, I got lost in the storm." Austin felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of men cruel enough to murder and rob travelers, but he kept his voice calm. "Did they hurt you? Are you injured anywhere?" Luna shook her head slowly. "I twisted my ankle running through the woods, and I have not eaten since the morning before the attack, but otherwise, I am unharmed. I just kept walking, trying to find help, until I could not walk anymore. I remember crawling into that tree, thinking I would just rest for a moment, and then everything went black." "You are lucky to be alive," Austin said, moving to the stove where he had kept a pot of stew warm. "Let me get you some food, and then you can rest more if you need. There is no rush. You are welcome to stay here until you are strong enough to decide what you want to do next." He ladled the stew into a bowl and brought it to her, along with a cup of water, and watched as she struggled to sit up against the pillows, wincing as she moved. Without thinking, he reached out to help her, his hand supporting her back, and he felt her stiffen at the contact before gradually relaxing, accepting his assistance. When she was settled, he handed her the bowl and stepped back, giving her space, though he could not quite bring himself to look away from her face as she ate with the desperate hunger of someone who had been truly starving. "Thank you," she said between bites, and the gratitude in her voice was so genuine that it made something warm unfurl in Austin's chest. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me." "The storm would have passed eventually," Austin said, though they both knew that was not necessarily true. Storms in the mountains could last for days, and exposure killed more people than bullets in these parts. "But I am glad I found you when I did. You can stay here as long as you need. I will ride into town tomorrow and report what happened to the sheriff. Maybe he can send men to look for those bandits, though I will not lie to you, Luna. Men like that are often long gone before anyone can catch them." She nodded, a look of resignation crossing her face that made her seem older than her years. "I know. They took everything I had, every penny I had saved to start a new life in California. I suppose I will have to find work here instead and save all over again." "What kind of work were you planning to do in Sacramento?" Austin asked, settling back into his chair, fascinated despite himself by this woman who had literally fallen into his life during a storm. "I am a seamstress," Luna said, and there was pride in her voice. "A good one. I was trained by my aunt back in Missouri, and I thought I could open a shop in the city, somewhere with enough people that I could make a real living. But Downieville is a mining town, is it not? I doubt there is much call for fine sewing here." "You might be surprised," Austin said thoughtfully. "The miners might not care much about fashion, but there are families here too, and more coming every month as the town grows. The general store sells fabric, but there is no proper seamstress that I know of. You could do well here if you decided to stay, at least until you saved enough to continue to Sacramento, if that is still what you want." Luna looked at him with those piercing green eyes, and Austin felt something shift in the air between them, a connection forming that neither of them had expected. "Why are you being so kind to me?" she asked quietly. "You do not know me. I could be anyone." Austin considered the question, trying to put into words something he did not fully understand himself. "I suppose because out here we look after each other, or we should anyway. This land is hard enough without people making it harder by turning their backs on those in need. Besides, my mother raised me to be a gentleman, even if I do not always look like one." He gestured to his rough clothes and calloused hands, and was rewarded with a small smile from Luna, the first he had seen, and it transformed her face in a way that made his heart skip. She finished the stew and set the bowl aside, her eyelids already growing heavy again despite having just woken. "I am so tired," she admitted, almost apologetically. "I do not understand why when I slept all night." "Your body has been through an ordeal," Austin said gently. "It needs time to recover. Sleep as much as you want. I will be here if you need anything, and I promise I will not disturb you." Luna nodded, sliding back down under the blankets, and within moments she was asleep again, her breathing evening out into the slow rhythm of deep rest. Austin watched her for a while longer, then forced himself to turn away and busy himself with chores around the cabin, though his thoughts kept drifting back to the woman in his bed, to the way her hair fell across the pillow, and the way her hand curled under her cheek like a child's. Over the next 3 days, Luna slowly regained her strength, and Austin found himself looking forward to the moments when she was awake, when they could talk over meals, or while he tended to small tasks around the cabin. She told him about growing up in Missouri, about losing her parents to fever when she was 16, and going to live with her aunt who taught her the art of sewing, about deciding to head west after her aunt passed away the previous year, leaving her alone in a world that had little patience for single women with no family to support them. Austin, in turn, told her about his own journey to California, about leaving his family's farm in Texas with dreams of striking gold, only to realize after a year of backbreaking work in the mines that the real fortune was in the land itself, in building something permanent rather than chasing the glittering promise of easy wealth. He had claimed his property, built his cabin with his own hands, and now made a modest living running cattle and hunting, supplementing his income by occasionally guiding travelers through the mountain passes. "It sounds like a lonely life," Luna observed one evening as they sat by the fire, she on the bed and he in his chair, the space between them feeling both vast and intimate at the same time. Austin shrugged, trying to appear casual even though her words struck closer to home than he wanted to admit. "I suppose it can be, but I prefer to think of it as peaceful. I have my horse, my work, and the mountains. That is enough for most days. But not all days." Luna pressed, and there was something in her voice that made him look up, meeting her eyes across the flickering firelight. "No," he admitted softly. "Not all days." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words until Luna looked away, color rising in her cheeks. "I should start thinking about what to do next," she said, changing the subject. "I cannot impose on your hospitality forever, and my ankle is much better now. Perhaps tomorrow you could take me into town and I could inquire about work." Austin felt a strange sense of panic at the thought of her leaving, even though he knew it was inevitable and proper. "Of course," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We can go tomorrow if you feel ready. I know the owner of the general store, and I could introduce you, see if he knows anyone who might need a seamstress." The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having finally passed, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling. Luna had asked Austin to turn his back while she changed into a spare dress he had ridden into town to purchase for her the day before, using money from his carefully hoarded savings, and trying not to think too hard about what the shopkeeper must have thought. When she told him he could turn around, he was struck anew by her beauty, the simple blue calico somehow making her eyes even more vivid, her dark hair braided and pinned in a way that spoke of feminine grace even in rustic circumstances. They rode into Downieville together, Luna seated behind Austin on his mare, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, and he was acutely aware of every place their bodies touched, of the way she felt pressed against his back. The town was bustling with activity, miners and merchants and families all going about their business under the bright autumn sun, and Austin guided them to the general store where he helped Luna dismount, his hands lingering on her waist perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary. Inside, they found Thomas Warren, the store owner, sorting through a shipment of goods. Austin made introductions, explaining Luna's situation in broad terms, leaving out the worst details of the attack, and Thomas listened with interest, his sharp businessman's eyes assessing Luna with frank curiosity. "A seamstress, you say?" Thomas rubbed his bearded chin thoughtfully. "Well, Miss Nichols, I cannot offer you work myself, but I know several ladies in town who have been complaining about the lack of skilled needle workers hereabouts. My wife, for one, has been trying to alter her dresses herself with poor results. If you would not mind, I could send word around that you are available for hire, and I am certain you would have customers before the week is out." Luna's face lit up with hope. "That would be wonderful, Mr. Warren. Thank you. But I must be honest with you, I have no place to stay, and no money to rent a room until I have earned some. I do not suppose you know of anyone who might offer lodging in exchange for sewing work." Thomas frowned, scratching his head. "That is a difficulty. The boarding house is full up with miners, and it is no place for a lady besides. There is the hotel, but they require payment up front." He glanced at Austin, a speculative look entering his eyes. "Of course, I suppose if Austin here is willing to vouch for you and continue to offer you shelter for a bit longer, that might work until you get established. It is a bit unconventional, but these are unconventional times, and I know Austin to be a man of honor." Austin felt heat rise in his neck, aware of what Thomas was really asking, whether he was willing to risk his reputation and Luna's by continuing to house her under his roof without a chaperone. But when he looked at Luna and saw the mixture of hope and uncertainty in her face, he knew there was only one answer he could give. "Luna is welcome to stay with me as long as she needs," he said firmly. "My cabin is small, but it is respectable, and I give you my word that Miss Nichols will be treated with nothing but respect and propriety." Thomas nodded, satisfied. "Then it is settled. I will spread the word, Miss Nichols, and I expect you will have work soon enough." They left the store with Luna's spirits visibly lifted, and Austin suggested they walk through the town so she could get her bearings and see what Downieville had to offer. They passed the saloons and the assayer's office, the blacksmith and the small white church on the hill. And everywhere they went, Austin found himself introducing Luna to people he knew, watching as she charmed them with her gentle manners and quick smile. He could see the townspeople warming to her, especially the women, who seemed hungry for female companionship in a place where men still outnumbered women 5-1. By the time they rode back to the cabin that evening, Luna was practically glowing with optimism. "I cannot believe how kind everyone was," she said, her voice bright with happiness. "And Mrs. Warren stopped me before we left and asked if I could make her a new dress for the church social next month. She's going to pay me $5, Austin, $5 for one dress. If I can get even 2 or 3 customers a week, I will have enough to rent a room within a month." Austin should have felt happy for her, and part of him did, but another part, a selfish part he was not proud of, wished she would not talk about leaving quite so enthusiastically. He had grown accustomed to her presence in his cabin over the past few days, to the sound of her voice and the way she hummed while she worked on mending his shirts without being asked, to the smell of her hair and the way she laughed at his stories. The thought of going back to his solitary existence filled him with a loneliness he had not felt in years. "That is wonderful, Luna," he said, meaning it despite his conflicted feelings. "You will do well here, I can tell." That night, after they had eaten dinner and Luna had settled into bed, Austin lay on his bedroll near the fire, staring up at the ceiling and listening to her breathing in the darkness. He had given up his bed without hesitation, knowing it was the right thing to do, but now he found himself wondering what it would be like to lie beside her, to hold her through the night and wake up to her face each morning. The thought was dangerous, he knew, because Luna had made no indication that she thought of him as anything more than a kind stranger who had helped her in a time of need, and he had no right to expect or hope for more. But hope, he was learning, was not something easily controlled, and as the days turned into weeks, Austin found himself falling deeper and deeper in love with the woman who had come into his life during a storm. Luna threw herself into her work with impressive determination, and true to Thomas Warren's word, customers began arriving at Austin's cabin within days, women seeking everything from simple mending to elaborate gowns. Austin converted a corner of his cabin into a makeshift workspace for her, building a table where she could cut fabric and fit garments, and Luna repaid him by cooking meals that were far superior to his own rough attempts, and by filling his home with a warmth and liveliness that had been absent before. They fell into a comfortable routine, Austin working his land and hunting during the day while Luna sewed, and then coming together in the evenings to share meals and conversation. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams, and Austin found himself opening up to her in ways he had not done with anyone else, telling her about his fears and failures along with his hopes for the future. Luna, for her part, seemed to blossom in the safety and stability Austin provided, the haunted look gradually fading from her eyes as she regained weight and color. She laughed more easily now, teased him about his terrible coffee, and sometimes Austin would catch her watching him with an expression he could not quite read, something soft and wondering that made his heart race with possibility. It was nearly a month after he had found her in the tree when things between them shifted irrevocably. Austin had been out hunting and returned late, long after dark, cold and tired and looking forward to the warmth of his cabin. But when he opened the door, he found Luna pacing the floor, her face pale and her hands twisted together in obvious distress. "What is wrong?" he asked immediately, dropping his rifle and moving toward her. "Are you hurt? Did someone bother you?" "No, nothing like that," Luna said quickly, but tears were streaming down her face now, and she seemed unable to stop them. "I am sorry. I did not mean for you to see me like this. I was just thinking about everything that has happened, and I realized that tomorrow marks 2 months since my aunt died, and I just felt so overwhelmed, so grateful that I survived the attack and found you, but also so sad for everything I lost. And I do not know. I just started crying and I could not stop." Austin closed the distance between them without thinking, pulling her into his arms and holding her as she sobbed against his chest, her small body shaking with the force of her grief. He murmured soothing nonsense, stroking her hair and her back, wishing he could take away her pain, even though he knew grief was something that had to be lived through and honored. When her tears finally subsided, Luna pulled back slightly, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I got your shirt all wet." "I do not care about my shirt," Austin said roughly. And then, because he could not help himself, because the feel of her in his arms had broken something loose inside him, he added, "Luna, I need to tell you something, and I know the timing is terrible, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. These past weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. And the thought of you leaving, of you renting a room in town and me going back to living alone, it is unbearable. I know I have no right to say this. I know you might not feel the same way, but I have fallen in love with you, completely and utterly, and I needed you to know." Luna stared at him, her lips parted in surprise, and for a horrible moment Austin thought he had made a terrible mistake, that he had ruined everything with his confession. But then she smiled, a tremulous, beautiful smile, and reached up to touch his face with her small hand. "You foolish, wonderful man," she said softly. "Did you really not know that I love you too? I have been trying to work up the courage to tell you for weeks, but I was so afraid you only saw me as someone you were helping out of kindness, that you would be horrified if you knew how I felt." Austin felt like his heart might burst from his chest. "You love me," he repeated, needing to hear it again, needing to be certain this was not some dream he would wake from. "Yes," Luna said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I love you, Austin Sawyer. You are the best man I have ever known, and I think I started falling in love with you the moment I woke up in your bed, and you looked at me with such kindness and concern. How could I not love you?" Austin did not trust himself to speak, so instead he bent his head and kissed her, gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded, her arms wrapping around his neck and pulling him closer. The kiss seemed to last both forever and not nearly long enough, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Austin rested his forehead against hers and laughed, pure joy bubbling up inside him. "Marry me," he said impulsively. "I know we have not known each other long, but I do not care. I want to spend every day of my life with you, Luna. I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you and build a future together. Marry me, please." Luna's eyes sparkled with tears again, but this time they were tears of happiness. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in the small white church on the hill, with half the town in attendance, everyone eager to witness the marriage of the seamstress and the cowboy who had found her in a storm. Luna wore a dress she had sewn herself, pale cream silk with delicate lace trim, and Austin wore his best suit, borrowed from Thomas Warren and altered by his bride's skilled hands to fit him properly. As they exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for all their days, Austin thought about how improbable their story was, how a single decision to check the trails during a storm had changed the course of his entire life. Their wedding night was spent in Austin's cabin, which Luna had already begun to think of as their home, and as Austin carried his wife over the threshold, both of them laughing at the old-fashioned tradition, He marveled at how right everything felt, how perfectly Luna fit into his life and his arms. They made love with tenderness and passion, learning each other's bodies with gentle exploration. And afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed where Luna had first rested under his care, she traced patterns on his chest and whispered, "Thank you for finding me, for saving me." "Thank you for letting me love you," Austin whispered back, kissing her hair and holding her close as they drifted off to sleep, no longer two separate souls but one united heart. The first year of their marriage was marked by growth and change, both for Austin and Luna personally, and for Downieville as a whole. Luna's sewing business flourished, her reputation for quality work spreading throughout the region, and soon she had more customers than she could handle, necessitating the hiring of an apprentice, a young girl from town named Sarah who showed real talent with a needle. Austin expanded his cattle operation, using Luna's income and his own savings to purchase more land and livestock, building their future one careful decision at a time. But more than the material success, it was the emotional richness of their life together that made Austin wake each morning feeling grateful. Luna filled his days with laughter and love, challenging him intellectually with her quick mind while supporting him unconditionally in his endeavors. They talked for hours about everything under the sun, debated politics and philosophy, shared their fears and dreams, and grew ever closer with each passing day. It was late spring of 1880, nearly 2 years after Austin had found Luna in the tree, when she came to him one evening with news that made his heart soar. They were sitting on the porch he had built onto the cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of orange and gold, when Luna took his hand and placed it on her stomach, looking at him with eyes full of joy and nervousness. "We are going to have a baby," she said softly. "In about 6 months, if the doctor is right. Are you happy?" Austin pulled her onto his lap, holding her as though she were made of glass, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions flooding through him. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said hoarsely. "Luna, you have given me everything, more than I ever dreamed I could have. A child, our child, it is a miracle." Luna laughed, cupping his face in her hands. "Well, it is actually quite natural, biologically speaking, but I understand what you mean. I am happy too, Austin. And maybe a little terrified. What if I am not a good mother? What if something goes wrong?" "You will be an amazing mother," Austin said firmly, "and nothing is going to go wrong. I will not let it. I am going to take care of you so well, Luna. You will not have to lift a finger for the next 6 months." "That is ridiculous and impractical," Luna said, but she was smiling. "But I appreciate the sentiment. We are going to be parents, Austin. Can you believe it?" "No," Austin admitted, kissing her softly. "But I am going to love every minute of figuring it out with you." The pregnancy was not easy, particularly in the later months when Luna struggled with exhaustion and swelling. But Austin was true to his word, caring for her with devoted attention, taking over most of the household chores and even learning to cook properly so Luna would not have to stand over the stove when she was tired. He read to her in the evenings, rubbed her aching feet and back, and talked to their unborn child through Luna's belly, telling stories and making promises about the life they would have together. When Luna's labor began on a cold November night, Austin sent for the midwife and then held his wife's hand through hours of pain and struggle, whispering encouragement and love even when he was terrified by how much she was suffering. But when the baby finally arrived, screaming lustily as the midwife cleaned him off, and Austin saw his son for the first time, tiny and perfect and miraculous, every moment of fear was forgotten in the overwhelming rush of love. "A boy," Luna said weakly, holding out her arms for the baby, and Austin carefully placed their son in her embrace, his vision blurring with tears as he watched his wife kiss their child's forehead with infinite tenderness. "What should we name him?" Austin asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and wrapping his arms around both Luna and the baby, his family, his entire world. Luna looked up at him, her face exhausted but glowing. "I was thinking James, after your father. James Samuel Sawyer. What do you think?" Austin nodded, too emotional to speak, and they sat together in the quiet cabin, the three of them, as morning light began to creep through the windows, starting their new chapter as a family. James proved to be a healthy, happy baby, and watching Luna with their son made Austin fall even more deeply in love with his wife, if that was possible. She was patient and nurturing, singing lullabies and telling stories, but also firm when needed, teaching James from the earliest age that actions had consequences. Austin, for his part, was a devoted father, wearing James in a sling while he worked around the property, teaching him about the land and the animals even before the boy could understand words. As James grew from a baby into a toddler and then a rambunctious young boy, Austin and Luna's love only deepened, tested by the challenges of parenthood but never weakened. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or miscommunication, but they had learned early to talk through problems rather than letting resentment build, and their commitment to each other and their family remained unshakable. When James was 4, Luna became pregnant again, and this time she carried a daughter, born during a spring rainstorm that reminded Austin so vividly of the night he had found Luna that it felt like poetry. They named her Rose, and she had her mother's green eyes and dark hair, along with a fierce temperament that kept both parents on their toes. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm, the Sawyer family becoming a beloved fixture in Downieville's growing community. Austin's cattle business prospered enough that he was able to hire help, giving him more time to spend with his family, while Luna eventually opened an actual dress shop in town, though she was careful to balance her work with her responsibilities as a mother. They built a larger house on their property, with separate bedrooms for the children and a proper workspace for Luna. But they kept the original cabin too, using it sometimes for storage and sometimes as a place to escape to when they wanted to remember their beginnings. The years passed in a blur of joy and occasional sorrow, of watching their children grow and their love mature into something even richer than the passionate romance of their early days. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, survived harsh winters and summer droughts, mourned the losses of friends and welcomed new ones into their lives. Through it all, Austin never stopped being grateful for the storm that had led him to Luna, never stopped marveling at the improbable chain of events that had brought them together. It was on their 20th wedding anniversary, in 1898, that Austin suggested they take a walk to the place where he had found her, that hollowed tree that still stood despite the passage of time. Luna agreed, and they left James, now a young man of 18 helping run the ranch, and Rose, a spirited 14-year-old in charge of their younger siblings, the twin boys born 5 years after Rose, who were the surprise joy of their middle years. Hand in hand, Austin and Luna walked through the autumn forest, following the path Austin had ridden that stormy night so long ago. When they reached the fallen oak, they stood looking at it in silence, both lost in memories. "I was so scared," Luna said finally. "I thought I was going to die in that tree, alone and forgotten, and then you appeared like some kind of guardian angel, except you were soaking wet and grumpy about being out in the storm." Austin laughed, pulling her close. "I was not grumpy, I was concerned. There is a difference." "If you say so," Luna teased, but her expression grew serious as she looked up at him. Austin, Have I ever properly thanked you for everything you have given me? Not just saving my life that night, but for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me, for being the kind of husband and father that other men should aspire to be. You thank me every day just by being you, Austin said simply. Luna, I am the one who should be grateful. You transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions, but you gave me purpose and joy and a reason to be better than I was. You gave me a family, a home in the truest sense of the word. I love you more today than I did the day we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. That is my promise to you, for whatever years we have left. Luna's eyes filled with tears, the happy kind that came from being deeply moved. I love you too, Austin Sawyer, with everything I am and everything I will ever be. Thank you for carrying me to a real bed and letting me rest all those years ago, but more than that, thank you for giving me a place to rest my heart. They kissed there in the forest, beside the tree that had sheltered Luna in her darkest hour, and it felt like closing a circle, like honoring the journey they had taken together from strangers to soulmates. When they finally turned to walk back home, their arms around each other, they talked about the future, about watching their children grow and have families of their own, about growing old together on the land they loved, about all the adventures still to come. The walk home took them past the creek that bordered their property, now crossed by a sturdy bridge Austin had built years ago, and up the hill to where their house stood, smoke rising cheerfully from the chimney. They could hear the sounds of their children laughing inside, James's deep voice mixing with Rose's lighter tones and the twins' excited chatter, and Austin felt a profound sense of contentment wash over him. This was what he had been searching for all those years ago when he left Texas seeking fortune in California. Not gold or wealth or glory, but this. A home full of love and laughter, a wife who was his partner in every sense of the word, children who would carry their legacy forward into the future. He had found his treasure, and it had been sleeping in a hollowed tree during a storm, waiting for him to bring her home. As they reached the porch, Luna paused and turned to look back at the mountains, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. "It is beautiful here," she said softly. "I am so glad I ended up in Downieville, so glad fate or providence or whatever you want to call it brought me to that tree on that particular night." "I am glad too," Austin said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on her head. "Though I prefer to think it was not just fate but choice. You chose to survive, to keep going even when things seemed impossible. You chose to trust me when you had every reason to be wary. You chose to love me and build a life with me. Those choices matter, Luna." She turned in his arms, standing on her toes to kiss him softly. "Then I choose you, Austin Sawyer, today and every day for the rest of our lives." They stood there on the porch as the sun completed its descent, holding each other and looking forward to all the tomorrows they would share. Two souls who had found each other in the wilderness and built something beautiful and lasting from that chance encounter. Inside, their children called for them, wanting to show them something or ask them questions or simply be near them, and Austin and Luna smiled at each other, recognizing the beautiful chaos of family life for the gift it was. "Ready to go in?" Luna asked. "Always, as long as you are with me," Austin replied, and together they walked into their home, into the warmth and light and love that filled every corner, leaving the past respectfully behind and embracing the present with grateful hearts. In the years that followed, Austin and Luna continued to be pillars of their community, respected for their kindness and integrity, admired for the way they loved each other and their children so completely. They watched James marry a sweet girl from town and start his own ranch nearby. Saw Rose grow into a talented artist whose paintings captured the wild beauty of the California mountains, and delighted in seeing the twins develop into distinct personalities, one studious and one adventurous, both devoted to their parents and siblings. They grew old together gracefully, Austin's hair turning silver and Luna's face gaining lines that only made her more beautiful in his eyes. They still took walks together every evening, still talked for hours about everything and nothing, still looked at each other with the same love and wonder that had characterized their early days, though now tempered and deepened by decades of shared experience. On Austin's 70th birthday, surrounded by children and grandchildren who had gathered to celebrate, Luna stood and raised her glass for a toast. "To my husband," she said, her voice still strong despite her years. "The man who found me when I was lost, who carried me to safety, who gave me not just shelter but a home, not just kindness but love. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Austin Sawyer, and I thank God for every day we have had together." Austin rose and pulled her into his arms, kissing her to the applause and laughter of their family. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "That storm 20 years ago brought me the greatest treasure I could ever have hoped to find, and I have never regretted a single moment of our life together." As the celebration continued around them, Austin thought back to that young man who had ridden out into a storm, compelled by some instinct he had not fully understood, and he sent a silent thank you to whatever force had guided him to that tree. Every choice they had made since that night, every challenge they had overcome, every joy they had shared, had led them to this moment, surrounded by the evidence of their love in the faces of their descendants. Luna squeezed his hand, as if reading his thoughts, and smiled at him with eyes that still sparkled with the same brightness that had captivated him the first time she had opened them in his cabin. They did not need words anymore, not for moments like these, because they understood each other with the deep knowing that came from 20 years of partnership, of choosing each other every single day. The party went late into the evening, filled with stories and songs and the kind of laughter that comes from genuine happiness. And when the last guest had finally departed and the house had grown quiet, Austin and Luna climbed the stairs to their bedroom, leaning on each other slightly, tired but content. "That was a good day," Luna said as she settled into bed, and Austin climbed in beside her, pulling her close the way he had done every night for 2 decades. "Every day with you is a good day," Austin replied, meaning it with his whole heart, and as they drifted off to sleep in each other's arms, both of them were smiling, secure in the knowledge that their love story, which had begun with such unlikely circumstances, had become something truly extraordinary. Their legacy lived on long after they were gone, passed down through generations of Sawyers who told the story of how their great-great-grandparents met, the cowboy who found a woman sleeping in a hollowed tree and carried her to a real bed, letting her rest and ultimately giving her a home, a family, and a love that transcended the harsh realities of the Wild West to become something beautiful and enduring. It was a story of hope and kindness, of second chances and the power of choosing love even in difficult circumstances, and it remained a favorite tale in Downieville for generations, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures come not from gold mines but from open hearts and the courage to help someone in need.